When my grandmother left me her entire estate worth $3 million, my family said I was being too dramatic about wanting to contest it. They said I should just accept that Grandma Rose obviously made a mistake, that she meant to leave everything to my Uncle Marcus instead. After all, what had I ever done to deserve it? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that Grandma Rose and I had been planning this moment for 2 years. Every family gathering where they mocked my anxiety, every holiday where they dismissed my concerns as theatrical nonsense, every time they rolled their eyes when I tried to speak up about anything, she had been watching, taking notes, and getting angrier by the day. By the time I was done with them, they learned exactly what real drama looked like. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I've been called dramatic my entire life. When I was 8 and told my parents that Uncle Marcus had been stealing money from Grandma Rose's purse during family dinners, they said I was being dramatic. When I was 15 and mentioned that my cousin Jake was selling Grandma's prescription medications to kids at school, they said I was starting trouble for attention. When I was 22 and graduated college with a degree in forensic accounting, ready to help Grandma organize her finances, they said I was being presumptuous and overthinking everything. The truth is, I wasn't dramatic at all. I was observant, I paid attention. And in a family full of people who preferred to look the other way, that made me the problem. Grandma Rose lived in a sprawling Victorian house in Salem, Oregon, the kind of place that had been in our family for 4 generations. The wraparound porch was painted sage green, and the garden was always immaculate because Grandma spent hours every morning tending to her roses. She was 83 years old, sharp as a tack, and had more energy than most people half her age. But she was also wealthy, and that made her a target. My family had been circling her like vultures for as long as I could remember. Uncle Marcus, who was Dad's older brother, had moved back into Grandma's house 3 years ago after his second divorce, claiming he needed to, quote, take care of her. In reality, he was unemployed, had lost his contractor's license due to multiple fraud complaints, and needed somewhere to live rent-free while he figured out his next scheme. My Aunt Patricia, Marcus's sister, visited twice a week with homemade casseroles and a practiced smile, always managing to steer conversations toward Grandma's future plans and how important it was to keep things simple when it came to wills and estates. Patricia worked as a real estate agent and had been dropping hints about how Grandma's house would need to be sold eventually, how she could handle the transaction and make sure everything went smoothly. Then there was my cousin Jake, Marcus's son, who was 25 and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. Jake had a gambling addiction that the family pretended didn't exist, and a habit of asking Grandma for loans that everyone knew would never be repaid. He'd show up at her house with sob stories about overdue rent or car repairs, and Grandma would write him checks because she couldn't bear to see any of her grandchildren struggle. My parents, David and Carmen, weren't as obviously predatory as the others, but they weren't innocent either. Dad worked in insurance claims and had been pushing Grandma to increase her life insurance policy, supposedly for peace of mind. Mom had been researching assisted living facilities, insisting that Grandma was getting too old to live alone in such a big house, conveniently ignoring the fact that Marcus was already living there. And then there was me, the dramatic one, the one who asked too many questions and noticed too many things. The one who actually spent time with Grandma because I enjoyed her company, not because I wanted something from her. I'd been visiting Grandma Rose every Sunday since I was in high school. We'd drink coffee on her porch, work in her garden, and talk about everything from politics to old family stories to my dreams of starting my own accounting firm. She was the only person in my family who never made me feel like my thoughts and feelings were too much, too intense, too dramatic. It was during one of these Sunday visits, about 2 years before she died, that Grandma first brought up the subject of her will. "Elena, honey," she said, setting down her coffee cup and looking at me with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." I was trimming dead blooms from her prize-winning roses, and I paused, sensing the serious tone in her voice. "Of course, Grandma. What is it? Do you think your family loves me, or do they love my money?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at her, this tiny woman who had raised 4 children and survived the Great Depression and 2 wars, And I saw something in her expression that I'd never noticed before: loneliness. Despite being surrounded by family members who visited regularly and claimed to care about her, she was lonely. I could have given her a diplomatic answer. I could have reassured her that everyone loved her and that she shouldn't worry about such things. But Grandma Rose had always valued honesty above politeness, and she deserved the truth. "I think some of them genuinely love you," I said carefully, "but I also think some of them see you as a bank account with legs." She nodded slowly, not looking surprised. "That's what I thought too. And what about you, Elena? What do you see when you look at me?" "I see the woman who taught me how to make tamales from scratch when I was 10. I see the person who drove 4 hours to my college graduation when everyone else was too busy. I see someone who listens to me without making me feel like I'm too much." I paused, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "I see my grandma." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Good. Because I've been thinking a lot lately about what's going to happen when I'm gone, and I want to make sure my money goes to someone who will use it for the right reasons." Over the next several months, Grandma Rose began sharing more details about her financial situation. She owned the house outright, plus 2 rental properties in Portland that brought in steady income. She had investments, savings accounts, and a life insurance policy that my dad had convinced her to increase to $500,000. All told, her estate was worth approximately $3 million. She also told me about the things she'd been noticing. How Marcus had been forging her signature on checks, thinking she wouldn't notice the slight differences in handwriting. How Patricia had been taking photos of the antique furniture and jewelry, ostensibly for insurance purposes, but really to catalog what would be available when Grandma died. How Jake had stolen her credit card information and was making small purchases, hoping they'd go unnoticed among her regular expenses. "The thing is," Grandma said during one of our conversations, "I could confront them about this. I could cut them off right now. But I want to see how far they'll go. I want to see their true colors before I make any final decisions." That's when she asked me to help her set up a trap. Using my background in forensic accounting, I helped Grandma install discrete security cameras throughout her house. We set up a separate bank account that would track any unauthorized access attempts. I created detailed spreadsheets documenting every suspicious transaction, every forged check, every instance of theft or manipulation. For 2 years, we gathered evidence. And for 2 years, my family continued to treat me like the dramatic, oversensitive family member who couldn't be trusted with serious matters. The irony was that they were right about one thing: I was dramatic. I had always been emotional, passionate, intense. When I cared about something,
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
cared deeply. When something upset me, I couldn't just brush it off and move on. When I saw injustice, I couldn't stay quiet about it. But being dramatic didn't make me wrong. And it definitely didn't make me stupid. During those 2 years, the family's behavior toward Grandma Rose became increasingly brazen. Marcus started bringing friends over to the house, treating it like his personal bachelor pad, and charging them rent to stay in the guest rooms. Patricia began scheduling, quote, consultations with estate planning attorneys, claiming she was helping Grandma get her affairs in order. Jake's requests for money became more frequent and more expensive, and he started bringing his girlfriend around, clearly hoping to curry favor with the family matriarch. Meanwhile, I continued my weekly visits, helping Grandma maintain her garden, organizing her medications, and listening to her stories about the old days. The family began to resent even this innocent connection. Elena's always been Grandma's favorite. I overheard Patricia telling Marcus one day when I arrived early for a visit. She's probably filling her head with all kinds of nonsense trying to turn her against the rest of us. Someone needs to have a talk with her, Marcus replied. Make it clear that she's not entitled to anything just because she brings cookies over every week. They were right that I was Grandma's favorite, but not for the reasons they thought. I was her favorite because I was the only one who saw her as a person instead of a prize to be won. As Grandma's health began to decline slightly, the pressure from the family intensified. She started experiencing some mild confusion and occasional forgetfulness. Nothing serious, but enough to give the vultures an opening. They began suggesting that she might need help managing her finances, that someone should have power of attorney. that it was time to start making concrete plans for her care. Elena gets so worked up about everything, my mother said during a family dinner at Grandma's house about 6 months before she died. She's always been dramatic, but lately she's been paranoid too. She keeps asking questions about Grandma's finances like she thinks someone is trying to steal from her. It's probably all those crime shows she watches, Uncle Marcus added with a laugh. She thinks everyone's a criminal. Maybe we should limit her visits, Patricia suggested. All that suspicion and negativity can't be good for Mom's mental state. I sat there listening to them discuss me like I wasn't in the room, feeling my face burn with humiliation and anger. But I also felt something else, determination. They had no idea what was coming. Grandma Rose, who had been quietly eating her dinner throughout this conversation, finally looked up. Elena is welcome in my house anytime she wants to visit, she said firmly. And anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to leave. The room went silent. It was the first time I'd ever heard Grandma directly contradict the family's criticism of me, and everyone seemed shocked by her directness. Mom, we're just concerned, Patricia said in her practiced, soothing voice. Elena tends to get very emotional about things, and we don't want her to upset you with her worries. The only thing that upsets me, Grandma replied, is people who think I'm too old or too stupid to know what's going on in my own house. Another uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Marcus cleared his throat and changed the subject to something safer, but I could see the wheels turning in everyone's heads. They were realizing that Grandma was more aware than they'd thought, and that made me dangerous. After that dinner, the family's treatment of me shifted from dismissive to actively hostile. They started excluding me from family events, claiming they'd forgotten to invite me or that they'd assumed I was too busy. They'd have conversations about Grandma's care and finances, then stop talking when I entered the room. They began making comments about how I was taking advantage of an elderly woman, how my frequent visits were inappropriate and suspicious. The more they pushed back against my presence in Grandma's life, the more determined I became to protect her, and the more evidence we gathered of their true intentions. 3 months before Grandma Rose died, she had what appeared to be a minor stroke. She was hospitalized for a week, and during that time, the family went into overdrive. Marcus immediately started talking about how she clearly couldn't live alone anymore. Patricia began researching nursing homes and assisted living facilities. My parents started discussing the need for someone to have power of attorney. And Jake, thinking no one would notice during the chaos, used Grandma's credit card to pay off a $5,000 gambling debt. When Grandma was released from the hospital, she seemed frailer but still mentally sharp. The family was hovering constantly, using her temporary weakness as an excuse to insert themselves more deeply into her daily life. They started talking openly about her will, assuming that her brief health scare had left her too confused to understand what they were saying. The important thing, I heard Marcus telling Patricia, is to make sure everything goes to someone who can handle it responsibly. Mom's always been too soft-hearted with money. She needs someone practical making decisions. Of course, Patricia agreed. Someone who understands real estate and investments. Someone who won't get emotional and make poor choices. They were standing in Grandma's kitchen, talking about dividing up her assets like she was already dead. I was in the living room helping her organize her medications, and both of us could hear every word. Grandma looked at me with fire in her eyes. "Are you getting this?" she whispered. I nodded toward the discreet recording device we'd hidden near the kitchen doorway. Every word. That night, Grandma Rose called her attorney and made some final changes to her will. She also increased her life insurance policy again, this time to $1 million, and named me as the sole beneficiary. "I want them to fight over it," she told me. "I want to see exactly how low they'll sink when they think there's money at stake. And then, I want them to learn that actions have consequences." 2 months later, Grandma Rose died peacefully in her sleep. The family was devastated, or at least they put on a good show of being devastated. Marcus immediately started making arrangements for the funeral, taking charge like he was the head of the family. Patricia began sorting through Grandma's belongings, ostensibly to help with the estate, but really to catalog everything valuable. Jake started asking questions about when the will would be read, and how long it would take to settle the estate. And I played my part perfectly. I grieved genuinely for the woman who had been my closest friend and strongest supporter. I let the family exclude me from the funeral planning. I stayed quiet when they made decisions about Grandma's belongings without consulting me. I acted like the dramatic, emotional family member who was too overcome with grief to think practically about money and inheritance. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Grandma's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Chen, had known about our plan from the beginning. She'd helped us document everything, and she was looking forward to the family's reaction almost as much as I was. The night before the reading, Patricia called me for the first time since Grandma's death. "Elena, honey," she said in her fake sweet voice, "I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow. I know you're probably expecting to inherit something from Grandma, but I don't want you to be disappointed. The reality is that she had some significant expenses in her final months, and there might not be as much left as people think." I could barely contain my laughter. "Oh, okay. I wasn't really expecting anything anyway." "Good, that's a healthy attitude. And remember, if you do inherit something small, it would probably be best to let Marcus handle it. He has experience with financial management, and you're still so young. Sometimes grief can make people make poor decisions with money." "You're probably right," I agreed. "I wouldn't know what to do with an inheritance anyway." "Exactly. I'm so glad you're being mature about this. Some people get very dramatic about money, but you've always been level-headed." I hung up the phone and smiled. Patricia had just handed me the perfect opening for what was about to happen. The next morning, I dressed carefully for the will reading. I chose a simple black dress, minimal makeup, and pulled my hair back in a conservative bun. I wanted to look like exactly what they expected: the grieving, naive granddaughter who wouldn't know how to handle serious money. The reading was held at Victoria Chen's law office, a sleek modern building in downtown Salem. The entire family was there: Marcus, Patricia, my parents, Jake, and even some more distant relatives who had driven in from out of state. Everyone was dressed in appropriately somber colors, but I could see the excitement and anticipation in their eyes. Victoria called us into her conference room, and we all took seats around a long mahogany table. She was a small woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away. She opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Rose Martinez was very specific about how she wanted this reading conducted, so I'll be following her instructions exactly. She started with some small bequests: Grandma's jewelry to Patricia, her gardening tools to my mother, some books and personal items to various relatives. Everyone nodded politely, clearly waiting for the main event. "Now," Victoria continued, "for the primary estate." Mrs. Martinez owned her home at 847 Maple Street, valued at approximately $800,000. She also owned 2 rental properties in Portland, with a combined value of $600,000. She had investment accounts totaling approximately $900,000, savings accounts with $400,000, and various other assets, bringing the total estate value to approximately $3 million. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Everyone was doing mental math, trying to figure out how much their share would be worth. Mrs. Martinez was very clear about her wishes regarding this estate, Victoria went on. She spent considerable time over the past 2 years making sure her will reflected her true intentions. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Patricia smoothed her skirt and tried to look dignified. My parents exchanged glances. Jake was practically vibrating with excitement. "The entirety of the estate," Victoria announced, "including the house, rental properties, investments, and bank accounts, is bequeathed to Elena Maria Vasquez." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the words sank in, as 20 people realized that their expected windfall had just vanished. The shock on their faces was exactly what Grandma Rose had hoped to see. Marcus was the first to speak. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Victoria replied calmly. Mrs. Martinez was very specific about this bequest. "But Elena's just a granddaughter," Patricia protested. "She's not even a direct heir. This doesn't make sense." Mrs. Martinez had the right to leave her property to anyone she chose, Victoria explained. She was of sound mind when she made these decisions. She was manipulated, Marcus said, his voice rising. Elena's been poisoning her mind against the family for years. This will should be contested. I finally spoke up, using the timid voice I'd perfected over the years. Maybe there really was a mistake. I don't understand why Grandma would leave everything to me. Maybe she meant to divide it among everyone? The family pounced on this immediately. See, Patricia said. Even Elena knows this isn't right. She's being mature about it. We should definitely contest this, my father added. Mom wasn't thinking clearly in her final months. Elena, honey, my mother said, you don't really want all this responsibility, do you? It would be much better to let the adults handle things. I looked around the table at all these people who had spent years dismissing me as too dramatic, too emotional, too immature to be taken seriously, and I smiled. Actually, I said, my voice growing stronger, I think I'll keep it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena, Uncle Marcus said in a warning tone, don't be greedy. You're talking about $3 million. That's more money than you've ever seen in your life. You're right, I agreed. It is a lot of money. But apparently Grandma Rose thought I could handle it. This is ridiculous, Jake burst out. You don't deserve this money. What have you ever done for Grandma besides bring her cookies and gossip? That's when I decided it was time to drop the act. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick folder that I'd prepared for this moment. Actually, Jake, I've done quite a lot for Grandma. I've helped her document years of theft, fraud, and manipulation by her own family members. I opened the folder and began spreading documents across the table. Bank statements showing Marcus's forged checks. Photographs that Patricia had taken of antique furniture with price estimates written on the back. Credit card statements highlighting Jake's unauthorized purchases. Recordings of family conversations where they discussed Grandma's money like she was already dead. What the hell is this? Marcus demanded. This is evidence, I said calmly. Evidence that Grandma Rose and I have been collecting for 2 years. Evidence of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. Victoria Chen smiled for the first time that day. Mrs. Martinez also left specific instructions regarding this evidence. Elena, would you like me to continue? I nodded, feeling a rush of satisfaction as I watched my family's faces cycle through confusion, fear, and dawning horror. Mrs. Martinez was very clear that if anyone contested her will or challenged Elena's inheritance, this evidence should be turned over to the appropriate authorities. She also left individual letters for each family member, explaining exactly why they were being disinherited. Victoria began distributing sealed envelopes around the table. Each one was labeled with a family member's name in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. Marcus tore his open first, his face growing redder with each line he read. Patricia opened hers with trembling hands. My parents read theirs in stunned silence. Jake's letter was apparently short and to the point, because he crumpled it up and threw it across the room. She was senile, Marcus shouted. This whole thing is the product of a confused old woman and a manipulative little bitch who took advantage of her. Actually, I said, still maintaining my calm tone, Grandma Rose had a full cognitive evaluation just 3 months before she died. Dr. Harrison confirmed that she was completely competent to make legal decisions. His report is part of the file I'll be submitting to the district attorney's office. The room erupted in chaos. Marcus was shouting about manipulation and undue influence. Patricia was crying and insisting that she'd only been trying to help. My parents were demanding to know how long I'd been scheming behind their backs. Jake was threatening to contest the will and sue me for everything I was worth. Through it all, Victoria Chen sat calmly organizing her paperwork, and I sat quietly watching my family reveal their true selves. Finally, I stood up. The room gradually fell silent as everyone turned to look at me. You want to know what's dramatic? I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. Dramatic is stealing from an 83-year-old woman who gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. I looked directly at Marcus. Dramatic is taking photos of your mother's belongings so you can sell them before she's even cold in the ground. My gaze shifted to Patricia. Dramatic is using your grandmother's credit card to pay gambling debts while she's in the hospital, recovering from a stroke. Jake had the grace to look ashamed, but only for a moment. You called me dramatic my entire life because I noticed things, because I asked questions, because I cared enough to pay attention to what was really happening. I picked up my purse and the folder of evidence. Well, you were right, I am dramatic. And now you get to see exactly what real drama looks like. I turned to Victoria. Please proceed with filing the criminal complaints. I want charges pressed for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. And make sure the insurance company knows about Dad's role in convincing Grandma to increase her life insurance policy while he was processing fraudulent claims. The color drained from my father's face as he realized I knew about his insurance fraud scheme too. Elena, please, my mother said, reaching out to me. We're family. Surely we can work this out without involving the police. I looked at her, this woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic to be taken seriously. You're right, Mom. We are family. That's exactly why this is so disappointing. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. For the record, I never wanted Grandma's money. I would have given it all up to have her back for just one more Sunday afternoon. But since I can't have that, I'm going to make sure her final wishes are respected. She wanted you to face consequences for what you did to her, and that's exactly what's going to happen. This isn't over, Marcus called after me. We'll fight this. We'll prove you manipulated her. I smiled and looked back at him one last time. Good luck with that, Uncle Marcus. But you might want to use whatever money you have left for a good lawyer, instead of whatever get-rich-quick scheme you're planning next. Something tells me you're going to need it. As I walked out of that conference room, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Shouting, accusations, desperate attempts to salvage what they thought they were entitled to. But I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the dramatic one in the room. I was just the one who had been paying attention all along. And Grandma Rose would have been so proud. The first week after the will reading was eerily quiet. I half expected my phone to ring constantly with threats, pleas, or attempts at manipulation, but instead I heard nothing. It was like the entire family had collectively decided to pretend I didn't exist. I knew better than to think they'd given up, though. They were regrouping, planning their next move. I spent those quiet days settling into my new reality as a millionaire. It felt surreal walking through Grandma Rose's house knowing it was actually mine now. Every room held memories of our Sunday visits. Every corner had a story. The kitchen where we'd baked dozens of batches of snickerdoodles. The living room where she'd taught me to knit. The garden where we'd spent countless hours talking about life while tending to her beloved roses. But the house also held evidence of the family's betrayal. I found things that even our careful documentation had missed. Empty spaces on shelves where valuable items used to sit. Prescription bottles with Grandma's name but mysterious gaps in the pill counts. A hidden camera that Marcus had installed in the study, probably to monitor when Grandma was accessing her safe. I was photographing this additional evidence when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize holding an official-looking envelope. When I opened the door, she handed me the papers with an apologetic smile. Elena Vasquez? You're being served with a civil lawsuit challenging the validity of Rose Martinez's will. I thanked her and closed the door, then leaned against it and laughed. Right on schedule. Marcus had filed the contest exactly 1 week after the reading, probably the minimum time his lawyer needed to prepare the paperwork. The lawsuit was even more absurd than I'd expected. According to the filing, I had systematically isolated Grandma Rose from her loving family, manipulated her into changing her will through undue influence, and taken advantage of her declining mental state to steal her rightful inheritance from her devoted children and grandchildren. The supporting documentation was creative. I had to give them credit for that. They'd assembled character witnesses who would testify about my possessive behavior toward Grandma. They'd found a handwriting expert who claimed that some of the signatures on Grandma's recent financial documents looked inconsistent. They'd even dug up my old college roommate, who was apparently willing to testify that I'd always been obsessed with money and had talked about inheriting from rich relatives. What they didn't know was that Grandma Rose had anticipated this exact scenario. Hidden in her safe, which only Victoria Chen and I knew the combination to, were additional documents that would destroy their case completely. The safe contained video recordings from the security cameras we'd installed, showing Marcus forging checks, Patricia photographing valuables, and Jake stealing medications. It held audio recordings of family conversations where they openly discussed how to manipulate Grandma into changing her will in their favor. Most damaging of all, it contained handwritten journals that Grandma had kept for the past 3 years, documenting every instance of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and outright theft. But I decided to let them dig their own graves a little deeper before I revealed this evidence. The harassment started 2 days after I was served with the lawsuit. First, it was just phone calls at odd hours with no one on the other end. Then someone started driving by the house at all hours, slowing down to stare at the windows. My car tires were slashed while I was at work. Someone left a bag of dead roses on my front porch with a note that said, "This is what happens to thieves." I documented everything, of course. Photos, police reports, security camera footage. I was building a harassment case that would complement the elder abuse charges I was already pursuing. The family's legal strategy became clear when Patricia showed up at my office uninvited, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing her most sincere expression. She'd dressed carefully for this performance, choosing a modest blue dress and minimal jewelry to project maternal concern rather than greed. "Elena, sweetheart," she said as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. "Really? What kind of misunderstanding?" "Well, this whole legal mess, for one thing. Marcus is so upset, and he's not thinking clearly. You know how he gets when he's emotional." She set the flowers on my desk and folded her hands in her lap. "I told him we should just talk to you directly, family to family, and work this out like reasonable people." "I'm listening." "The thing is, honey, we're all grieving Grandma Rose. We all loved her so much, and losing her has been devastating for everyone. Sometimes when people are in pain, they make decisions that don't reflect their true feelings." She paused, tilting her head sympathetically. "I think that's what happened with the will. Grandma was hurting, and maybe she wasn't thinking as clearly as usual." I nodded thoughtfully. "You think she was confused when she left everything to me?" "Not confused exactly, but maybe influenced by her emotions. You were visiting so often in those final months, and she probably felt grateful for the company. But gratitude isn't the same as making rational decisions about money, so you think she should have left her estate to Marcus instead?" Patricia's eyes lit up, thinking she was making progress. "Well, he is her oldest child, and he has so much experience with financial management and real estate. It would just make sense for him to handle everything. The same Marcus who's been living in her house rent-free for 3 years while claiming unemployment benefits he's not eligible for?" Her expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Marcus has been taking care of Grandma, making sure she wasn't alone in that big house. That's worth more than rent, don't you think? Is that why he was charging his friends to stay in the guest rooms? Because he was so focused on taking care of Grandma?" "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I have bank records showing payments from Marcus's friends directly into his personal account, Patricia. $500 a month from each of them, for what he called, quote, temporary housing. He was running an illegal boarding house out of Grandma's home and pocketing the profits. The color drained from her face, but she pressed on. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that Marcus deserves to inherit something. He's family. So am I. You're not her child, Elena. You're just a granddaughter. And a young one, at that. $3 million is a massive responsibility. You don't have the life experience to handle that kind of wealth wisely." I leaned forward slightly. "What would you do with it, Patricia? If you inherited $3 million, how would you handle it wisely?" She brightened, apparently thinking this was her chance to demonstrate her superior judgment. Well, first I'd sell the house. It's too big for one person, and the maintenance costs are enormous. I'd invest the proceeds in stable assets, maybe some rental properties in better neighborhoods. The rental income from the Portland properties could be improved with some strategic renovations. And the liquid assets should be diversified across multiple investment vehicles to minimize risk. You've thought about this a lot. I'm a real estate professional, Elena. This is what I do for a living. And what about the family? Would you share the inheritance with Marcus and Jake and my parents? Of course. Family takes care of family. I'd make sure everyone was provided for according to their needs and contributions. I sat back and smiled. That's interesting, because according to the will that Grandma filed 2 years ago, that's exactly what she planned to do. She was going to leave the estate to you and Marcus to manage, with provisions for everyone in the family. Patricia looked confused. 2 years ago? But you said she left everything to you. She did, but only after she discovered what you and Marcus were really up to. I opened the folder and showed her copies of bank statements. This is from Marcus's account, showing deposits that correspond exactly to withdrawals from Grandma's account. Withdrawals she didn't authorize. Patricia stared at the documents, her carefully constructed story crumbling around her. And this, I continued, pulling out more papers, is a record of your real estate searches on Grandma's house. You've been checking the property value and researching comparable sales since 6 months after Dad and I got married into this family. You were planning to sell her house while she was still alive in it. That's not. I was just what? Just preparing to profit from her death? Patricia's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Marcus hasn't worked in 2 years. Jake can't keep a job. Your parents are struggling with their mortgage. We all needed that money. And Grandma Rose needed to feel safe and loved in her own home. She needed to trust that her family cared about her as a person, not just as a bank account. She was old, Elena. She was going to die anyway. What difference does it make if we planned ahead? The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. What difference does it make? She was your mother, Patricia. She raised you, supported you, loved you unconditionally for 60 years. And you repaid that by stealing from her and planning her funeral before she was even sick. Patricia stood up abruptly, her mask of maternal concern completely gone. You self-righteous little bitch. You think you're so much better than the rest of us, but you're just a manipulative gold digger who got lucky. At least I never stole from her. Didn't you? You think all those visits and conversations were innocent? You were grooming her, Elena. You were systematically turning her against her own family so you could steal her money. I stood up too, feeling my temper rise for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I visited her because I loved her. I talked to her because she was interesting and funny and wise. I helped her because she asked for my help, not because I wanted something from her. Bullshit. Nobody spends that much time with an old woman unless they want something. Maybe that says more about you than it does about me. Patricia grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back with a venomous expression. This isn't over, Elena. We're going to fight this will, and we're going to win. When we're done with you, you'll be lucky to keep your job, let alone any inheritance. Good luck with that, I called after her. But you might want to start looking for a new lawyer. The one you have now is about to find out exactly how much evidence Grandma and I collected over the past 2 years. She slammed the door so hard that my office windows rattled. That afternoon, I called Victoria Chen and told her about Patricia's visit. She listened to my account with professional interest, taking notes about the admissions Patricia had made regarding Marcus's illegal subletting and the family's advance planning for Grandma's death. This is actually very helpful, Victoria said. Patricia essentially confirmed several elements of our elder abuse case. Her statement about it not mattering because your grandmother was going to die anyway is particularly damaging. What happens next? Well, they have 60 days to present their evidence challenging the will. Based on what I've seen so far, their case is weak. The handwriting analysis is questionable. The character witnesses are clearly biased, and they have no evidence of actual mental incapacity. Meanwhile, we have medical records confirming your grandmother's competency, detailed documentation of their financial abuse, and now Patricia's own admissions. And the criminal case? That's proceeding separately. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence we submitted, and I expect charges to be filed within the next few weeks. Elder abuse and financial exploitation are taken very seriously in Oregon, especially when there's this much documentation. What about the harassment? Keep documenting everything. If it escalates, we can seek a restraining order. But honestly, I think they're more bark than bite at this point. They're desperate. And desperate people make stupid mistakes. She was right about the stupid mistakes. Over the next 2 weeks, the family's behavior became increasingly erratic and self-destructive. Marcus showed up at my workplace twice, once drunk and once apparently high on something, demanding to speak to me about his mother's stolen money. Security had to escort him out both times, and his outbursts were witnessed by dozens of my colleagues. When the police questioned him about the incidents, he ranted about family conspiracies and legal theft, providing them with an excellent example of his mental state and judgment. Jake started posting on social media about the inheritance dispute, painting himself as a victim of legal manipulation and asking for donations to help fund his legal fight. The posts were filled with profanity, threats, and wild accusations that made him look unhinged rather than sympathetic. Several people who knew Grandma Rose commented on his posts with their own stories about his drug use and gambling problems, creating a public record of his character issues. My parents tried a different approach, showing up at my apartment with my childhood photo albums and a carefully prepared speech about family loyalty and forgiveness. They'd clearly rehearsed their presentation, taking turns delivering emotional appeals about how much they loved me and how disappointed they were that money had come between us. "We raised you better than this, Elena," my mother said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "We taught you to value family over material possessions. You also taught me to pay attention to people's actions rather than their words," I replied. "And your actions for the past 3 years have been pretty clear." "We never stole anything from Grandma," my father protested. "Yes, I helped her increase her life insurance policy, but that was for her own peace of mind. She wanted to make sure her family would be taken care of." "Dad, I have recordings of you telling Marcus that the increased policy would make the inheritance worth the wait. You also filed false claims on 2 other policies to inflate the settlements. The insurance fraud investigation is already underway." His face went pale. "Those claims were legitimate. There were real damages." "Were there?" "Because the fire department report on Mrs. Johnson's house fire says the blaze started in the electrical panel, not the kitchen stove like you claimed. And Mr. Peterson's car accident happened 3 days before you backdated his policy application." My father sank into a chair, the fight going out of him. "How do you know all this?" "Because I'm a forensic accountant, Dad. This is literally what I do for a living. I notice patterns in financial records. I spot irregularities. I investigate fraud." I sat down across from him. "Did you really think you could run insurance scams for 2 years and I wouldn't notice?" "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. "It started with one small claim that was borderline and then it just snowballed." "And Grandma's policy?" "I thought if she had a bigger policy, it would benefit everyone. I didn't know she was planning to leave everything to you." "So you were planning to benefit from her death regardless of what her will said?" He looked up at me with eyes full of shame. "We needed the money, Elena, your mother's medical bills, the mortgage, Jake's debts that we co-signed for. We were drowning. And rather than asking for help, you decided to commit insurance fraud and steal from Grandma. We didn't steal from her. We just anticipated her support. Dad, you forged her signature on insurance documents. Marcus forged her signature on checks. Patricia was selling her belongings. Jake was using her credit cards. How is that not stealing?" My mother finally spoke up, her voice small and broken. "We never meant to hurt her, but you did hurt her. She knew what you were doing. She knew her own family was stealing from her, lying to her, using her. Do you have any idea how much that broke her heart? Then why didn't she say something? Why didn't she confront us?" "Because she loved you anyway. Because even after everything you did, she still hoped you'd realize what you were doing and Stop. I stood up and walked to the window. She gave you 2 years to come clean, to apologize, to show that you cared about her as more than just a source of money. Instead, you got worse. The room was quiet for a long time. Finally, my father spoke. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The criminal charges, the civil lawsuit, the insurance investigation. All of it. And us? Our relationship? I turned to look at them, these two people who had raised me and loved me and taught me right from wrong, and who had somehow lost their way so completely. I don't know, Dad. That depends on what you do next. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice. You can keep fighting this, keep lying, and making excuses and trying to blame me for your problems. Or you can take responsibility for what you've done and try to make amends. What kind of amends? Start by admitting what you did. Not just to me, but to the authorities. Cooperate with the investigations. Pay back what you stole. Show some actual remorse instead of just self-pity. My mother looked up hopefully. And if we do that, you'll drop the charges? The charges stand regardless. But maybe eventually we can rebuild some kind of relationship. Maybe. They left that night without saying goodbye, and I knew I probably wouldn't see them again until the trial. 3 weeks later, the district attorney filed formal charges. Marcus was indicted on 12 counts of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. Patricia faced 8 counts related to theft and conspiracy. Jake was charged with identity theft and credit card fraud. My father was indicted on insurance fraud charges by both the state and federal authorities. The family's response was swift and predictable. Within hours of the charges being announced, I received angry voicemails, threatening text messages, and a stream of social media posts calling me a traitor and a manipulator. Marcus's lawyer held a press conference claiming that I had fabricated evidence and coerced a vulnerable elderly woman into changing her will. Patricia started a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for their legal defense, complete with a sob story about a greedy granddaughter who had destroyed a loving family. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the public wasn't buying their victim narrative. Too many people in the community had known Grandma Rose personally. They'd seen how devoted she was to her family, and they'd also witnessed the family's increasingly obvious focus on her money rather than her well-being. Local news coverage of the case was particularly damaging to the family's credibility. Reporters interviewed neighbors who talked about Marcus's friends coming and going at all hours, paying him cash for rooms in Grandma's house. They spoke to Grandma's former doctor, who confirmed that she'd been asking questions about her missing medications for months before her death. They even found the pharmacist where Jake had been selling Grandma's prescription drugs, who was willing to testify about his regular transactions. The most damaging coverage came when a local television station obtained some of the audio recordings we'd made. They played excerpts of family conversations where Marcus, Patricia, and my parents discussed Grandma's assets like she was already dead, made jokes about her confusion and forgetfulness, and planned how to divide her belongings. Hearing their own words played back on television seemed to finally break through their denial. Marcus fired his lawyer and attempted to negotiate a plea deal. Patricia withdrew her support for the will contest and stopped posting on social media. My parents hired a criminal defense attorney and stopped returning reporters' phone calls. Jake was the last holdout, continuing to insist that he'd done nothing wrong and that I had orchestrated an elaborate frame job. His defiance lasted until the federal authorities raided his apartment and found detailed records of his gambling activities, drug dealing, and identity theft schemes that went far beyond just stealing from Grandma Rose. Apparently, he'd been running credit card scams on multiple elderly victims throughout the Portland area. When Jake was arrested on federal charges, the local case became part of a much larger investigation into elder abuse and fraud. The FBI had been tracking a network of criminals who specifically targeted wealthy elderly people, and Jake's activities had put him on their radar. His association with my family had inadvertently exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond our personal situation. The revelation that Jake was connected to organized elder abuse changed the entire dynamic of the case. Suddenly, my family wasn't just facing charges related to stealing from Grandma Rose. They were potentially implicated in a federal investigation involving dozens of victims and millions of dollars in losses. Marcus and Patricia hired new lawyers and began cooperating with federal investigators. My parents withdrew their support for the will contest and publicly apologized for their actions. The family's united front against me completely collapsed as everyone scrambled to save themselves. Throughout all of this chaos, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. I went to work every day, tended to Grandma's garden in the evenings, and slowly began making the house feel like my home rather than just her home. I kept her bedroom exactly as she'd left it, but I moved my things into the guest room and started redecorating other spaces to reflect my own taste. The hardest part wasn't dealing with the legal drama or the family betrayal. It was the loneliness. Grandma Rose had been my closest friend and confidant, and her death had left a huge hole in my life that money couldn't fill. The inheritance was a blessing and a burden, providing financial security but also serving as a constant reminder of why I had received it. I started volunteering at a local elder care facility, helping other families navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of caring for aging relatives. It felt like a way to honor Grandma's memory while also using my experience to help prevent other families from going through what we'd experienced. One afternoon, while I was helping an elderly man organize his financial documents, he asked me why I spent so much time volunteering at the facility. I had a grandmother who was taken advantage of by her own family, I told him. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to other people. That's a noble calling, he said. But what about justice? Did the people who hurt your grandmother face consequences? I smiled, thinking about the pile of court documents on my kitchen table and the stack of plea agreements that Victoria Chen had showed me the week before. They're facing consequences. But the real justice is making sure other families don't go through the same thing. And your grandmother? What would she think about how everything turned out? I considered the question carefully. I think she'd be proud that I didn't let them get away with it. But I also think she'd be sad that it came to this. She loved them, even after everything they did. She wanted them to be better people, not just punished people. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. That's why I miss her so much. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that shocking day in Victoria Chen's conference room. I'd gone from being the family scapegoat to being a millionaire. From being dismissed as overly dramatic to being taken seriously by law enforcement and the media. But most importantly, I'd learned that being dramatic wasn't necessarily a flaw. Sometimes drama was just the appropriate response to dramatic circumstances. My phone rang as I pulled into Grandma's driveway. It was Victoria Chen, and she sounded pleased. Elena, I have some news about the plea negotiations. Marcus has agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'll serve 18 months in prison and pay full restitution for everything he stole. Patricia is negotiating a similar deal. Your parents' insurance fraud case is being handled separately, but their cooperation with the federal investigation should help them avoid prison time. And Jake? Jake is facing federal charges that could put him away for 10 years or more. He's not in a position to negotiate anything right now. So it's over? The criminal cases are mostly resolved, yes. The will contest was officially withdrawn this morning. You are now the undisputed heir to your grandmother's estate. I sat in my car in Grandma Rose's driveway, looking up at the house that was now legally mine, and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The legal battle was over, but the family relationships were probably damaged beyond repair. I'd won everything, but I'd also lost everything. Elena? Are you still there? Yes, sorry, I was just thinking. I imagine this is all quite overwhelming. $3 million is a significant responsibility. It's not the money that's overwhelming. It's everything else. The family situation? The realization that people I loved and trusted were capable of such cruelty. The knowledge that Grandma spent her final years feeling betrayed by her own children. The fact that I'll probably never have a normal relationship with any of them again. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Elena, can I give you some advice? Of course. Your grandmother didn't leave you that money as a burden. She left it as a gift of freedom, security, and opportunity. Don't let guilt or grief or family obligation turn it into something negative. Use it to build the life you want, to help the people you care about, to make a positive difference in the world. And my family? Your family made their choices. You can't control what they did or how they'll react to the consequences. All you can control is how you move forward from here. After I hung up the phone, I sat in the gathering dusk for a few more minutes, watching the lights come on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Normal families having normal dinners, dealing with normal problems. I envied them their simplicity, but I also knew that I'd been given something rare and precious, even if it had come at a terrible cost. I thought about Grandma Rose's final words to me, spoken just days before she died. Elena, promise me something. Promise me that when this is all over, you won't let bitterness or anger consume you. Use this experience to become stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Make your life count for something good. I'd made that promise, and now it was time to keep it. The legal drama was ending, but my real life was just beginning. Part 3. The final act. 6 months had passed since the plea agreements were finalized, and Salem had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. I'd grown accustomed to walking through the grocery store without whispered conversations following me down the aisles. The reporters had moved on to other stories. The legal documents had been filed away in boxes that I kept in Grandma Rose's old study, now transformed into my home office. But normal was a relative concept when you'd inherited $3 million from a grandmother who'd been systematically robbed by her own family. Normal was waking up every morning in a house that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume and wondering if I was honoring her memory, or just playing house in someone else's life. I'd thrown myself into work with an intensity that surprised even me. My forensic accounting practice had exploded after the media coverage of the case. Apparently, there were a lot of families dealing with similar situations, and they wanted someone who understood both the financial and emotional complexities of elder abuse. I'd hired 2 associates and moved the practice into a larger office downtown, but I still kept regular hours and maintained my volunteer work at the elder care facility. The money from Grandma's estate sat mostly untouched in investment accounts, growing steadily while I figured out what to do with it. I'd used some of it to pay off my student loans and buy a reliable car, but the rest felt too significant to spend on anything frivolous. It wasn't my money, not really. It was Grandma Rose's final gift, and I wanted to make sure I used it in a way that would make her proud. That's what I was thinking about on a Tuesday morning in March when Victoria Chen called with unexpected news. Elena, I just received a call from Marcus's attorney. He wants to arrange a meeting. I set down my coffee cup and frowned. A meeting about what? All the plea agreements are finalized. He claims Marcus has information about additional crimes that weren't included in the original charges. Apparently he's been thinking about things during his time in county jail, and he wants to make a full confession. What kind of additional crimes? He wouldn't say over the phone, but his attorney suggested it might be worth your while to hear what he has to say. I leaned back in my office chair and stared out the window at the Portland skyline. Why would Marcus want to confess to more crimes? He's already going to prison for 18 months. I'm not sure. Maybe his conscience is finally bothering him. Maybe he's hoping for leniency on his federal charges. Or maybe he's just tired of carrying secrets. When does he want to meet? This afternoon if you're available. The meeting would be at the county jail with both attorneys present. You wouldn't have to speak to him directly if you don't want to. I considered the offer carefully. Part of me had no interest in hearing anything Marcus had to say. He'd already done enough damage, and I'd moved on with my life. But another part of me was curious about what else he might have been hiding. If there were other victims, other elderly people who'd been taken advantage of, they deserve justice too. Set it up, I said finally, but I want a full recording of everything he says. 3 hours later, I found myself sitting in a sterile conference room at the Washington County Jail, separated from Marcus by a thick sheet of plexiglass. He looked older than his 52 years, with gray stubble and deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during the trial. Prison had not been kind to him. His attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Kim, sat beside him with a legal pad covered in notes. Victoria Chen sat next to me, her own recorder running on the table between us. "Thank you for coming," Sarah Kim began. "My client has some information that he believes will be valuable to ongoing investigations, and he wanted to share it directly with Ms. Vasquez." Marcus cleared his throat, and looked directly at me for the first time since the plea hearing. "Elena, I know you have no reason to trust anything I say, but I need you to hear this." I nodded but didn't speak. The thing is, what we did to Mom wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst time. He paused, running his hands through his thinning hair. "I've been stealing from elderly people for almost 10 years. Victoria Chen leaned forward slightly. "Are you confessing to additional elder abuse charges?" "I'm confessing to everything. The whole operation." Marcus looked back at me. "Remember how I lost my contractor's license? It wasn't just because of fraud complaints. It was because I was using my access to elderly clients' homes to steal from them." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I would do legitimate work for them, building trust over time. Then I'd start noticing things. Valuable items left out in the open, checkbooks lying around, medications that could be sold. I'd take small amounts at first, things they might not notice. Then I'd gradually escalate." "How many victims?" Victoria asked. "At least 30, probably more. I kept records at first, but then it got too complicated to track everything." Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a grocery list. "Patricia helped with some of them. She'd use her real estate connections to identify wealthy elderly homeowners who lived alone. Then I'd contact them about home improvement projects." "And Jake?" "Jake started helping when he was still in high school. I taught him how to copy credit card information, how to forge signatures, how to identify which medications had street value." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I turned my own son into a criminal." Sarah Kim consulted her notes. "My client is prepared to provide names, addresses, and specific details about each victim. He's also willing to testify against Patricia and Jake regarding their involvement in these additional crimes." I found my voice. "Why are you telling us this now?" Marcus looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. "Because I can't sleep, Elena. I can't eat. I can't stop thinking about what I did to Mom, and to all those other people. They trusted me, they welcomed me into their homes. They wrote me checks and offered me coffee, and showed me pictures of their grandchildren. And I repaid that trust by stealing everything I could get my hands on. So, this is about your conscience? This is about the fact that I'm 52 years old and I've wasted my entire adult life being a piece of garbage. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help make sure the other victims get some justice." Victoria Chen was taking notes rapidly. "Mr. Torres, are you aware that this confession could significantly increase your prison sentence?" "I'm aware. I'm also aware that I deserve whatever sentence they give me." "And you're willing to make this confession without any guarantee of leniency?" "I'm willing to confess because it's the right thing to do. For the first time in my life, I want to do the right thing." The meeting lasted 3 more hours as Marcus provided detailed information about his decade-long crime spree. Names, dates, amounts stolen, methods used. It was a comprehensive catalog of elder abuse that stretched across 3 counties and involved dozens of victims. Some of the stories were heartbreakingly familiar. An 80-year-old widower who'd hired Marcus to fix his roof, only to have Marcus steal his late wife's jewelry while supposedly working in the attic. A retired teacher who'd trusted Marcus to repair her front steps, not knowing he was slowly draining her savings account through forged checks. A veteran with dementia who'd been convinced to sign over power of attorney to Patricia, thinking she was helping him organize his finances. By the time Marcus finished his confession, I felt physically sick. This wasn't just about my family anymore. This was about a systematic pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people for financial exploitation. And it had been going on for years while everyone, including me, had been oblivious to the scope of the operation. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as the formal confession was winding down. "The life insurance policies." Victoria Chen looked up sharply. "What about them?" Dad didn't just encourage elderly clients to increase their policies. He helped them apply for policies they didn't understand, with beneficiaries they didn't choose. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your father has been filing life insurance claims on people who aren't actually dead. He's been taking out policies on elderly clients. then filing false death claims and collecting the payouts. The room went completely silent. Victoria Chen's pen had stopped moving. Sarah Kim was staring at her client with obvious shock. "How many policies?" Victoria asked quietly. "At least a dozen that I know of, maybe more. He's been doing it for about 5 years, always keeping the policy amounts low enough to avoid triggering major investigations." "Are you telling us that Mr. Vasquez has been committing life insurance fraud on a massive scale?" "I'm telling you that my brother-in-law is a sociopath who's been profiting from fake death claims, while his supposed victims are still alive and unaware that they even have life insurance policies." I stood up abruptly, feeling like I might vomit. "I need some air." Victoria Chen followed me out of the conference room and into the hallway, where I leaned against the wall and tried to process what I'd just heard. "Elena, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss next steps. My father has been filing fake death claims?" "Apparently, yes. And if Marcus is telling the truth, this could be the biggest insurance fraud case in Oregon history." "What does this mean for him? For my parents?" "It means the federal charges against your father just became much more serious. Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal crime that carries significant prison time. And if he's been doing this for years, the penalties could be severe." I closed my eyes and tried to imagine my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, systematically defrauding insurance companies, while elderly people trusted him with their most personal information. "There's something else we need to consider," Victoria continued. "If your father has been taking out policies on elderly clients without their knowledge, some of those clients could be in danger." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if he's already filed false death claims, he might eventually decide to make those claims legitimate." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think he might actually hurt someone?" "I think we need to notify the authorities immediately and make sure all potential victims are safe." Within hours of Marcus's confession, federal agents were executing search warrants on my father's office, his home, and his computer systems. What they found was even worse than Marcus had suggested. David Vasquez had been operating a sophisticated insurance fraud scheme that involved not just false death claims, but also identity theft, document forgery, and conspiracy with multiple accomplices. The investigation revealed that my father had been working with a network of crooked insurance agents, medical professionals, and legal clerks to create false identities for elderly clients, take out massive life insurance policies in their names, and then file death claims using fabricated death certificates and medical records. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Over 5 years, my father had filed false claims totaling more than $2 million. He'd created dozens of fake identities, forged hundreds of documents, and put countless elderly people at risk of identity theft and financial exploitation. But the most shocking discovery came when federal agents tracked down some of the supposed deceased policyholders. 3 of them had actually died under suspicious circumstances in the months following their policy applications. All 3 deaths had been ruled natural or accidental, but the timing raised serious questions about whether my father's fraud scheme had escalated to murder. The news broke on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon my phone was ringing constantly with reporters asking for comments about my father's arrest on federal murder charges. I'd gone from being the victim of family financial abuse to being the daughter of an accused killer in the span of 6 months. I drove to my parents' house that evening, not sure what I expected to find. Police cars were still parked outside, and crime scene tape blocked access to the front door. Neighbors stood in small groups on the sidewalk, talking in hushed tones and pointing at the house where they'd lived peacefully for 20 years. My mother was staying with her sister across town, according to one of the neighbors. She'd been questioned for hours but released without charges, since investigators hadn't found evidence of her direct involvement in the insurance fraud scheme. I called her that night, not sure what to say but knowing I needed to try. "Elena?" Her voice was small and broken when she answered the phone. "Mom, I heard about Dad. I'm so sorry." "They're saying he killed people, Elena. They're saying your father is a murderer." "I don't know what to believe anymore. He's not a killer. Whatever else he's done, he's not capable of murder." I wanted to agree with her, to offer comfort and support during what had to be the worst time of her life. But I'd seen the evidence of what my family was capable of. I'd watched people I'd loved and trusted reveal themselves to be thieves, liars, and manipulators. I couldn't rule out anything anymore. Mom, did you know about any of this? The insurance policies, the fake death claims? Of course not. I thought he was just helping elderly clients organize their insurance coverage. I never questioned the details. And the money? You never wondered where the extra income was coming from? There was a long pause. I thought he was just doing well at work. I thought maybe he'd gotten a promotion or a bonus. I didn't want to ask too many questions because things were so tight for so long. Mom, the investigators are going to want to talk to you again. You need to be completely honest with them. I've been honest. I don't know anything about murders or fake death claims or any of that. But you knew about Grandma Rose. You knew what Marcus and Patricia were doing. Another long pause. That was different. How was it different? It was family money. It was going to be ours eventually anyway. Mom, listen to yourself. You're justifying stealing from Grandma because you expected to inherit from her eventually. We weren't stealing. We were just anticipating. By forging her signature and taking her money without permission. Elena, please. I can't handle this right now. My husband has been arrested for murder. I can't also have my daughter attacking me. I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to understand how my family became capable of such terrible things. We're not terrible people. We just made some poor choices. Poor choices? Mom, Dad is accused of killing 3 elderly people for insurance money. Marcus spent 10 years systematically robbing seniors. That's not poor choices. That's criminal behavior. I can't talk about this anymore. Her voice was getting smaller, more fragile. I need to focus on getting your father a good lawyer. Mom, what if he actually did it? What if Dad actually killed those people? The line went dead. She'd hung up on me, and I knew she probably wouldn't take my calls for a long time. The trial preparation took 8 months. During that time, I learned details about my family's criminal activities that I sometimes wished I could forget. The evidence against my father was overwhelming. Financial records, forged documents, witness testimony from accomplices who'd agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The 3 suspicious deaths were harder to prove, but investigators had found disturbing patterns. All 3 victims had died within 6 months of their life insurance policies being increased. All 3 had been isolated elderly people with no close family members to ask questions about their deaths. All 3 had been clients of my father's insurance business. Marcus pled guilty to additional elder abuse charges and received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. Patricia was charged as an accomplice in the insurance fraud scheme and sentenced to 5 years. Jake's connection to the larger criminal network earned him a 15-year sentence on federal racketeering charges. My mother was never charged with any crimes, but the investigation destroyed her reputation and her financial security. She lost the house when my father's assets were seized to pay restitution to victims. She had to find work for the first time in 30 years, taking a part-time job at a department store while living in a tiny apartment across town. The murder trial began on a cold Tuesday in November, almost exactly 2 years after Grandma Rose's death. I attended every day of the proceedings, sitting in the gallery and watching my father's defense team try to convince a jury that he was a small-time insurance fraudster who'd never hurt anyone. The prosecution painted a different picture. They presented evidence that my father had been escalating his criminal behavior for years, moving from simple fraud to identity theft to what they argued was premeditated murder for financial gain. The first victim was an 81-year-old man named Robert Chen, who'd lived alone in a retirement community. My father had sold him a life insurance policy, then filed a death claim 6 months later using a forged death certificate. Robert Chen was actually still alive and testified via video link from his nursing home, explaining that he'd never known about the life insurance policy and had never given my father permission to represent him. The second victim was a 78-year-old woman named Dorothy Walsh, who died in what was originally ruled an accidental fall down her basement stairs. The prosecution argued that my father had pushed her down those stairs after increasing her life insurance policy and naming himself as a beneficiary through a forged power of attorney document. The third victim was a 74-year-old man named James Rodriguez, who died of what appeared to be a heart attack. Medical experts testified that traces of a prescription heart medication found in his system were inconsistent with his medical records, suggesting that he'd been deliberately overdosed. Watching my father sit at the defendant's table, dressed in an ill-fitting suit and taking notes on a legal pad, I struggled to reconcile this accused killer with the man who'd raised me. He looked smaller than I remembered, older and more fragile. When he occasionally glanced back at the gallery, our eyes would meet briefly before he'd look away. The defense argued that the deaths were coincidental, that my father was guilty of insurance fraud but not murder. They claimed that the prosecution was trying to turn a white-collar criminal into a serial killer without sufficient evidence. But the evidence was compelling. Financial records showed that my father had received over $300,000 from the 3 suspicious death claims. Phone records indicated that he'd been in contact with all 3 victims in the days before their deaths. And, most damaging of all, investigators had found internet searches on his computer for information about untraceable poisons and methods for staging accidental deaths. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. My father was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder, plus additional time for the insurance fraud charges. I watched as the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, no relief. Just a strange emptiness where my relationship with my father used to be. After the trial, I drove to Grandma Rose's house and sat in her garden, surrounded by the roses that she'd spent decades nurturing. It was late November, and most of the blooms were gone, but the underlying structure of the garden remained. The careful planning, the attention to detail, the evidence of someone who'd cared deeply about creating something beautiful and lasting. That's when I finally understood what I wanted to do with Grandma's money. I established the Rose Martinez Foundation for Elder Protection, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing elder abuse and supporting victims of financial exploitation. We provided free forensic accounting services to elderly people who suspected they were being taken advantage of. We offered educational programs to help seniors recognize and avoid scams. We worked with law enforcement agencies to investigate cases of elder abuse and fraud. The foundation grew quickly, funded by Grandma's inheritance, and supported by donations from people who'd been touched by our story. Within 2 years, we'd helped recover over $5 million in stolen assets for elderly victims. We'd provided training to thousands of senior citizens about financial safety. We'd assisted in the prosecution of dozens of elder abuse cases. I kept Grandma's house but converted part of it into office space for the foundation. Her bedroom became a conference room, where we met with clients and law enforcement officials. Her study became my private office, where I could work surrounded by her books and photographs, and the memories of our Sunday afternoon conversations. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Marcus in federal prison. He was participating in a rehabilitation program and had been working with other inmates to identify additional elder abuse cases. He wanted to continue helping with investigations and asked if the foundation might be interested in his assistance. I thought about it for a long time before responding. Marcus had caused tremendous pain and had stolen from dozens of vulnerable people. But he was also providing valuable information that was helping other victims get justice. And, perhaps most importantly, his cooperation was part of his attempt to make amends for his crimes. I wrote back and told him that the foundation would consider working with him, but only if he continued to provide full cooperation with law enforcement, and only if he donated any money he earned in prison to victim restitution funds. He agreed immediately. Patricia was released from federal prison after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence. She'd lost her real estate license and been ordered to pay full restitution to her victims. She moved to another state and took a job as a sales clerk, apparently trying to rebuild her life away from the notoriety of the case. Jake remained in federal prison, serving his 15-year sentence. According to reports from his attorneys, he'd struggled with addiction and mental health issues during his incarceration. I'd received several letters from him over the years, but I'd never responded. Some wounds were too deep to heal, some betrayals too complete to forgive. My mother and I maintained minimal contact. She'd moved to Arizona to live near her sister and had found work as a church secretary. We exchanged Christmas cards and occasional phone calls, but we never discussed the family or the trials or the years of criminal behavior that had destroyed our relationships. It was easier to pretend that we were just distant relatives who'd grown apart over time. On the 5th anniversary of Grandma Rose's death, I organized a memorial service at the Region elder care facility where I'd been volunteering. Dozens of people attended, including elderly clients we'd helped through the foundation, law enforcement officials who'd worked on elder abuse cases, and community members who'd been inspired by Grandma's story. During the service, I read from one of Grandma's journals, a passage she'd written about 3 months before her death. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. Not the money I'll leave behind, but the impact I'll have on the people I love. I hope Elena understands that the greatest gift I can give her isn't financial security, but the knowledge that she has the strength and wisdom to use whatever resources she has to make the world a better place. Money is just a tool. What matters is how you choose to use it. As I read those words, I realized that Grandma Rose had gotten exactly what she'd hoped for. She'd wanted to see her family's true character revealed, and she had. She'd wanted justice for the crimes committed against her, and she'd gotten it. But most importantly, she'd wanted her resources to be used for good. And they were. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd originally imagined. We'd helped hundreds of elderly victims recover stolen assets. We'd trained thousands of seniors to protect themselves from financial predators. We'd worked with legislators to strengthen elder abuse laws and with law enforcement agencies to improve investigation techniques. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was harder to quantify. We'd given elderly people a voice when they'd been silenced by family members who saw them as burdens. We'd provided dignity to victims who'd been made to feel ashamed of being taken advantage of. We'd created a community of support for people who'd often been isolated and forgotten. That evening, after the memorial service, I sat on Grandma's front porch and watched the sun set over Salem. The house was quiet, filled with memories and photographs and the lingering presence of a woman who'd loved deeply and been betrayed completely, but who'd found a way to turn that betrayal into something meaningful. My phone buzzed with a text message from one of our foundation clients, an 80-year-old woman whose son had been stealing her Social Security checks. Thanks to our intervention, she'd recovered the stolen money and her son was facing criminal charges. The message was simple. Thank you for helping me get my life back. I smiled and put the phone away. This was what Grandma Rose had envisioned when she'd made her final will. Not just punishment for the people who'd wronged her, but protection for others who might face similar betrayals. Not just justice, but healing. The family had called me dramatic for caring too much, for noticing too much, for refusing to ignore the truth when it was inconvenient. They'd been right about the dramatic part, but they'd been wrong about everything else. Sometimes drama was exactly what the situation called for. Sometimes the only appropriate response to betrayal was righteous anger. Sometimes the only way to honor love was to fight for justice. And sometimes the most dramatic thing you could do was refuse to let cruelty win. As I locked up the house and headed inside for the night, I thought about the speech I'd given at the memorial service earlier that day. I told the audience that Grandma Rose's greatest gift wasn't the money she'd left me, but the lesson she'd taught me about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. She'd shown me that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, that protecting someone sometimes means saying no to them, that family loyalty shouldn't extend to enabling criminal behavior or ignoring abuse. Most importantly, she'd taught me that being called dramatic wasn't an insult if you were being dramatic in service of justice and protection for vulnerable people. The Rose Martinez Foundation would continue growing, helping more victims and preventing more crimes. The family members who'd betrayed Grandma would continue serving their sentences and living with the consequences of their choices. And I would continue honoring her memory by using her gift to make sure other families didn't experience the pain and betrayal that had defined our final years together. It wasn't the ending any of us had expected when Grandma Rose first started changing her will, but it was the ending she'd planned for, and the one she'd deserved. Sometimes the most dramatic stories have the most meaningful conclusions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.